All right, welcome back for another deep dive. I gotta say, after that last episode, all that talk about haunted houses, well, let's just say I've been sleeping with the lights on.
Haha. Yeah, some of those stories would give anyone chills.
But I guess that's why we're here, right? To explore the things that go bump in the night.
That's right. And this time, we're diving headfirst into a film that takes that fear of the unknown and cranks it up to 11. Final Destination, 2000.
Oh man, Final Destination, a classic. I remember watching that in high school. Just the thought of cheating death and then, well.
Yeah, it's not exactly a recipe for a peaceful life.
So, for those who maybe haven't seen it or have managed to block it out of their memory, let's set the scene. We got Alex Browning, a high school student, about to board a plane for a class trip to Paris. Pretty exciting, right?
Yeah, sounds like the trip of a lifetime.
Until Alex has this absolutely horrifying premonition. He sees the plane, the one he's about to step on, exploding in midair.
And this isn't just some vague feeling of unease, right? It's a full-blown, vivid vision of the crash with all the terrifying details.
Oh, yeah. The film doesn't hold back. It's intense. And this vision is so powerful that Alex freaks out, causes a scene, and ends up getting himself and a few other students kicked off the flight.
Which, as it turns out, is the worst thing that could have happened to them.
Because, of course, the plane takes off, and just as Alex saw, it explodes, killing everyone on board.
Talk about a life-changing moment.
Yeah.
You survive a plane crash, but it plays out exactly as you predicted. It would mess anyone up.
Right. It's not just the trauma of the event itself, but the weight of knowing that you were right, that you saw it coming.
Absolutely. And that's where the real story of Final Destination begins. It's not just about cheating death. It's about dealing with the aftermath, the guilt, the paranoia, the feeling that something or someone is out to get you.
Because death doesn't just shrug its shoulders and say, oh, well, better luck next time.
It's not in this film. Final Destination introduces this concept that death has a plan, an order to things. And when these students survived the crash, they disrupted that order, basically skipped to the front of death's to-do list.
So now death has to, recalibrate.
Exactly. And it starts picking off the survivors one by one in the order they would have died on the plane.
Okay, so it's not just about escaping death. It's about trying to outrun it, knowing that it's constantly on your heels.
Right. And the film does a fantastic job of building this sense of dread, this feeling that no matter what you do, death is always one step ahead.
So how does that play out? Does death just show up with a scythe? Or is it more creative than that?
Oh, it's definitely creative. And that's one of the things that makes Final Destination so iconic. The death scenes, they're elaborate, they're unexpected, and they're often, well, pretty gruesome.
Oh, yeah. We're not talking about peaceful slips and falls here. We're talking Rube Goldberg-style chain reactions of doom.
Exactly. Death becomes this master puppeteer using everyday objects to create these elaborate and often terrifying scenarios.
It's like death has a twisted sense of humor, finding these ironic and often darkly funny ways to claim its victims.
Yeah, it's like death is saying, you might have cheated me once, but you can't escape your fate forever. And each death serves as a kind of warning to the remaining survivors.
Okay, so let's dive into some of these characters and their memorable departures. I'm particularly curious about Todd. He's Alex's best friend. And initially, he's the one who's least fazed by the whole near-death experience. He's almost relieved to be alive and just wants to move on.
Yeah, Todd represents that part of us that wants to believe that everything happens for a reason, that we're protected somehow.
But Final Destination doesn't really subscribe to that philosophy, does it?
Not exactly. And Todd's death is one of the most unsettling in the film. It's staged as an apparent suicide, playing on that initial optimism, that belief that he was safe.
And the way it unfolds is just, so disturbing. The dripping faucet, the loose clothesline, the broken fan. It's like watching a slow-motion train wreck.
It's that attention to detail, that buildup of tension that makes these deaths so effective. You know something bad is going to happen, but you don't know how or when.
Yeah, and it makes you really start to question everything. Is anything truly random? Or is everything connected, part of some grand design?
And that's the question that haunts the survivors throughout the film. Are they just pawns in death's game? Or do they have any agency at all?
It's like a constant battle between fate and free will.
Yeah.
And it's playing out in the most terrifying way possible. Then we have Terry Chaney, who's kind of the opposite of Todd in terms of her reaction to the whole situation. She's angry, she's dismissive, and she just wants to go back to her life, pretend like nothing happened.
Terry represents that part of us that wants to ignore the possibility of danger, to believe that if we just bury our heads in the sand, everything will be fine.
But as we learn in Final Destination, ignoring death is never a good idea.
Yeah, and Terry's death, while quick and brutal, really emphasizes that point.
Oh, man. Talk about being in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Right. She's walking down the street, totally oblivious, and bam, a speeding bus.
Like out in nowhere. It's a stark reminder that death can be so random, so unexpected.
Absolutely. And it plays into that primal fear we all have, the things we can't control, you know? But even with all these graphic warnings, the survivors can't seem to shake this feeling of being hunted.
Which makes sense. I mean, if I saw my friends dying in these freak accidents, I'd be a little paranoid too.
Right. And that's where the psychological aspect of the film really kicks in. It's not just about escaping physical danger, it's the mental toll, the knowledge that your life could end at any moment.
It's like living in a constant state of anxiety. And we see how that affects each character differently, right? Like Alex becomes obsessed with trying to figure out death's pattern, like he's trying to solve some twisted puzzle.
Yeah, and in a way he is. The film presents these deaths as these intricate puzzles, each with its own set of clues and foreshadowing.
Like with Mrs. Luton, the teacher, the one who was totally skeptical of Alex's premonition.
Oh, Miss Luton. Yeah, initially she's very dismissive, even hostile towards Alex.
Blaming him for ruining the trip and everything.
Yeah, exactly. But her death is drawn out, almost like a slow burn punishment.
Oh, yeah, hers is a rough one. It starts with these small accidents, spilling vodka, her computer going haywire, and then, well, let's just say things escalate quickly.
And the symbolism there is pretty powerful, too. The vodka, which she uses to numb her fear and guilt, ends up being the fuel for her fiery demise.
It's like death has this, I don't know, poetic justice thing going on. Each death seems to tie into the character's flaws or choices.
Yeah, it adds this whole other layer of complexity to the film. It's not just about who dies, but how and why they die.
Like it's tailor-made, you know? Each death is specific to that character.
Yeah.
Okay, so we talked about Todd and Miss Luton, but then there's Carter, the jock. He's like the complete opposite of Alex, super angry and defiant, refusing to accept this whole fate thing.
Carter represents that part of us that just wants to fight back, that wants to believe we have control over our own destiny. But as the film goes on and the body count keeps rising, even his tough guy act starts to crumble.
His attempts to fight back, to prove he's not scared, well, it kind of seems like he's playing right into death's hands.
Yeah, the more he resists, the more vulnerable he becomes. Almost like the film is suggesting that acceptance, or at least acknowledging the danger, is the key to survival.
Which brings us to Clear, Alex's love interest. She's the voice of reason in all this chaos.
Yeah, Clear's interesting. She believes Alex supports him, and they try to work together to break this cycle of death.
Their relationship brings this element of hope to the film, the idea that maybe love or human connection can offer some kind of protection.
But even then, even with their combined efforts, it feels like they're fighting a losing battle.
The film keeps you guessing the whole time. Can anyone really escape their fate?
Yeah, it's like a roller coaster. You're clinging to the hope that they'll figure it out, that they'll find a way to survive, but deep down you know that something terrible is coming.
Speaking of something terrible, that ending, Alex, Clear, and Carter, our final three, they actually make it to Paris, right?
Okay.
They think they've outsmarted death.
It's this brilliant twist. The Eiffel Tower, a symbol of hope, new beginnings, becomes this looming reminder that death is patient and its reach is long.
Yeah, and for a minute you're like, they did it. They actually escaped.
But then that final shot, the shadow of the Eiffel Tower falling across them, it's like, oh no, this isn't over.
Chills, literal chills. It's that lingering dread, the feeling that death is always lurking, waiting for the right moment to strike. Which, I mean, it did in the sequels. But even on its own, that first Final Destination is, well, it's a mind trip.
Definitely. It stays with you. It makes you think, what would I do? If I knew death was like on my tail, would I try to outrun it? Or just accept my fate?
You know, it's interesting, thinking back to our last episode, the one about haunted houses, there's this similar theme. The characters in those stories, they're trying to escape or defeat these supernatural forces.
But in Final Destination, it's not a ghost or a demon, it's death itself, which is something we all have to face eventually.
Right, and that's what makes Final Destination so terrifying, so effective. It takes this universal fear, this knowledge that we're all mortal, and it makes it so real, so immediate.
And it does it through these crazy, over-the-top death scenes, which are definitely entertaining, but it's the underlying message, that sense of unease, that really gets under your skin.
Yeah. So, as we wrap up this deep dive into Final Destination, we leave you with this thought. If you knew death was on your trail, what would you do differently? Would you live each day to the fullest? Or would you be paralyzed by fear? It's a tough question, but it's worth thinking about.
Absolutely, because as Final Destination reminds us, life is precious, and it can change in an instant.
Until next time, stay curious, keep exploring the dark side, and maybe be a little extra careful crossing the street. You never know what might be coming for you.
Rocking lobsters rise up tall, pincers flashing, hear that call. Sandy shores, their new domain. Crustacean rulers break the chain. Country lanes, oceans tide, from the currents can't hide. Pinch of fate, claws of doom. Underwater kings make room. Rock lobsters taking